How did Native Americans survive the coldest winters without firewood? Their methods are still astonishing today. Before us lie the endless plains of North America, bound by fierce frost and covered in deep snow. Temperatures here drop to extreme lows, and the biting wind can chill anyone who dares to challenge the elements to the bone. For thousands of years, people lived in this harsh world without central heating, modern insulation, or even, in many regions, sufficient firewood. Their survival in the middle of an icy desert seems like a real miracle, beyond our modern understanding of comfort and safety. These peoples did not simply endure the cold, they learned to use it to their advantage, turning the laws of physics into their allies. Their dwellings, clothing, and way of life were an ingenious system, honed to perfection in the crucible of the harshest winters on the planet. They knew the secrets that allowed them to preserve precious warmth and greet each new dawn, despite the fury of nature. This is a story not about struggle, but about harmony. Not about confrontation, but about a deep understanding of the world around them. Watch the video to the end, and you will learn how entire peoples thrived in conditions that we today would consider completely unfit for life, and what engineering solutions allowed them to sleep warmly during the fiercest blizzards. What if I told you that everything you knew about fighting the cold was just the tip of the iceberg? The basis of indigenous peoples' survival was not so much their ability to generate heat as their phenomenal ability to retain it. They intuitively understood the key principle of thermodynamics. The most effective insulator is still air. Their genius lay in finding and using natural materials that could hold the maximum amount of air in their volume. They created multi-layered systems where each layer performed its own task, capturing and immobilizing air pockets. It was true natural nanotechnology working on a macro level. One of the most amazing and unusual materials was cattail fluff, which was collected along rivers and lakes. This incredibly light and silky material has remarkable insulating properties that surpass many modern insulators. It was used to fill winter shoes and clothing linings, creating virtually weightless but very warm protection. Another secret ingredient was dry grass and moss, which was stuffed into the space between layers of clothing and the walls of dwellings. The thin, hollow stems of the grass created countless air pockets that prevented cold air from moving. It was a simple, accessible, and renewable resource that lay literally at their feet. They also made masterful use of animal skins, but not in the way we are accustomed to thinking. It was not only the fur that was important, but also the skin itself, which, when properly treated, became a windproof barrier. The combination of thick, windproof skin on the outside and fluffy fur or other insulation on the inside created the perfect protection. Even snow, the main symbol of winter, became their ally in keeping warm. They knew that freshly fallen loose snow contains a huge amount of air and is an excellent insulator. Therefore, they surrounded the bases of their dwellings with high snowdrifts, which protected them from the wind and prevented heat from escaping through the lower part of the walls. This philosophy of conservation, rather than production, of heat permeated all aspects of their lives. It required observation, patience, and a deep respect for the gifts of nature. Every element of their daily life was part of a unified, well-thought-out energy conservation system. They did not try to defeat winter, they became part of it, using its own laws for their own comfort. It was an invisible shield woven from air, down, grass, and snow that reliably protected them from the most severe frosts. Their homes were not just shelters, but complex thermal devices working in complete harmony with the environment. Instead of burning tons of fuel to heat huge spaces, they created a microclimate directly around themselves. It was a strategy of minimalism and efficiency that is becoming relevant again today. Their experience proves that the most ingenious solutions are often the simplest. We would love to hear your opinion. What do you think about this approach to insulation based on the use of unconventional natural materials? Write about it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next chapters of our research. Are you ready to learn the truth about the most famous dwelling of Native Americans? At first glance, the Tipi of the Great Plains tribe seems like a simple shelter made of poles and skins, incapable of protecting against the winter cold. However, this elegant conical structure is actually an engineering marvel, perfectly adapted to the harsh climate. The secret to its stability and warmth lies in details refined over centuries of observation. The conical shape made the dwelling incredibly wind-resistant, causing even hurricane-force winds to simply flow around it rather than press against the walls. The slightly backward-leaning cone further enhanced this effect, pressing the entire structure firmly against the ground. The base of the teepee was a frame of 15 20-long, straight pine poles. Installing this frame was an art in itself. 3 or 4 main supports were tied together, and the remaining poles were laid on them in a specific order. This created a strong and stable structure capable of withstanding the weight of heavy roofing and snow loads. The teepee covering was made from bison hides carefully sewn together. One such covering could weigh more than 100 kilograms and required 12 to 20 hides. Properly tanned and sewn, it became almost completely waterproof and completely windproof, which was critically important on the open plains. But the main secret of the teepee's thermal efficiency was hidden inside. An additional lining of thinner tanned hides was attached to the inside of the poles, which did not reach the ground by about half a meter. This detail created an air gap between the outer wall and the interior, working on the principle of a modern thermos. This inner lining served another important function. Cold air penetrating under the outer edge of the covering did not rush into the living space as an icy draft. Instead, it rose smoothly upward in the gap between the 2 layers of skins, mixing with the warm air from the hearth and creating a constant and adjustable draft. The hearth was not located in the very center, but was slightly offset towards the entrance. This thoughtful design allowed smoke to escape more efficiently through a special opening at the top. The smoke hole was equipped with 2 special valves, ears, which allowed the draft to be regulated and protected the hearth from rain and snow. The floor inside the teepee was covered with skins and sometimes dry grass, which provided additional insulation from the frozen ground. Sleeping places were located around the perimeter, on small elevations or simply on a thick layer of furs. People slept with their feet toward the fire so that the heat was evenly distributed throughout the body. Even the entrance to the Tipi was cleverly designed. It was always located on the east side to protect the dwelling from the prevailing westerly winds. The low and narrow opening was closed with a special skin curtain, minimizing heat loss when entering and exiting. Thus, the teepee was not just a dwelling, but a complex climatic system. It retained heat, provided ventilation, and protected from the wind, while being completely mobile. This unique combination of qualities made it the ideal home for the nomadic lifestyle of the Great Plains. But how did those who built their homes for centuries and could not move to warmer climates survive? Are you ready to learn how entire villages turned into a single warm organism in the next chapter? What I am about to show you will completely change your stereotypical view of ancient Native American buildings as primitive. In the northeast of the North American continent, in a land of dense deciduous forests and long snowy winters with temperatures reaching -30 degrees, the peoples of the Iroquois Confederacy developed a completely different revolutionary architectural concept for housing. They did not build mobile conical tents like nomads, but monumental stationary longhouses that served not only as a dwelling for a family, but as a real social and thermal center for an entire maternal clan of dozens of people. These were not tents, but full-fledged wooden buildings capable of standing in one place for decades. These impressive structures ranged from 20 to 60 meters in length and 6 to 8 meters in width, and were built from a strong, flexible frame of young elm trunks as thick as an arm. The trees were deliberately bent into regular arches, creating a vaulted tunnel-shaped roof, which made the structure incredibly strong and resistant to heavy snow loads in winter. The wooden frame was completely covered with large sheets of thick elm or ash bark, carefully laid overlapping like modern tiles for waterproofing. Bark was a natural roofing material, waterproof and insulating, available in abundance in the forests at no cost. The secret to the high thermal efficiency of the longhouse lay in its scale and the communal lifestyle of the tribe. Up to 20 related families, up to 100 people, could live in one such massive house at the same time, and the heat naturally emitted by the living bodies of dozens of people as they breathed and moved became a significant additional source of biological heating. It was a living, self-heating organism that warmed itself from within through collective metabolism. Each person generated about 100 watts of heat, and 100 people provided 10 kilowatts of free heating around the clock without fuel. Along the central wide passageway of the house, several open hearths were strategically located at equal distances of several meters from each other, usually from 3 to 10, depending on the length. The smoke from them naturally rose upward and escaped through special ventilation holes in the roof, which could be partially covered with movable sheets of bark to regulate the draft and protect against precipitation. This distributed system of multiple hearths made it possible to maintain a fire in several places at once, evenly distributing precious heat throughout the entire length of the huge building without any cold spots. Each family had access to its own hearth, but all the hearths together created a single heating system for the entire space. The family's living quarters were arranged in an orderly fashion on both sides of the central common passageway, like compartments on a train. Each family occupied its own designated section about 3 meters wide, which functionally consisted of 2 vertical levels. The lower level on the ground served as a place to sit and work during the day, cooking, repairing tools, socializing. The upper level, consisting of wide wooden platforms at a height of 1 meter, was used exclusively for the whole family to sleep on skins and blankets. The vertical division of space was an effective use of volume. 2-tiered living saved space and took advantage of the difference in temperature at different heights. These elevated sleeping platforms were a key engineering element of the heat conservation and comfort system. They critically raised people above the cold earthen floor, where, according to the laws of physics, the coldest and densest air accumulated due to convection. In addition, warm, light air from burning hearths rose and accumulated under the vaulted roof, naturally warming those sleeping on the upper tier of platforms. Sleeping upstairs meant sleeping in the warmest area of the house. Each meter of height added degrees of temperature due to air stratification, with physics working for comfort. The walls of the longhouse were deliberately multi-layered for maximum insulation. The inner surface of the walls was often additionally covered with woven mats made of cattail or animal skins around the entire perimeter. This created an additional insulating air layer between the bark and the living space, and effectively protected against drafts penetrating through the inevitable cracks in the bark outside. The double wall worked like a thermos. The outer bark blocked wind and moisture. The inner curtain retained heat, and the air between them insulated. Food supplies, corn, beans, pumpkins, and firewood for the winter were stored right inside the house, in special vestibules at the inn entrances or on high wooden shelves under the roof above the living quarters. This not only reliably protected strategic supplies from the weather and rodents outside, but also created additional significant thermal mass inside. The huge amount of tons of corn, beans, dried meat, and firewood served as a thermal insulator and buffer, stabilizing the temperature inside the room from sudden fluctuations. The supplies were not cargo, but insulation. Each bag of grain was a brick in the wall against the cold. The entrances to the longhouse from the ends were carefully designed on the principle of a vestibule or airlock. They often had a deliberately complex broken shape or were protected by additional woven screens or partitions on the outside. This created a low-pressure buffer zone that physically prevented the icy wind from rushing directly into the living space every time someone entered or exited through the door. The vestibule was a trap for the cold. It remained there, unable to penetrate further into the warm core of the house. Thus, the Iroquois longhouse was not just a large wooden building, but a carefully designed self-sufficient ecosystem for living. It ingeniously combined architectural engineering solutions, the social clan structure of matriarchy, and everyday habits into a single coordinated mechanism for collective survival in a harsh climate. This communal wooden fortress allowed people to comfortably survive the harshest winters with blizzards, relying simultaneously on the warmth of the hearth and the warmth of each other in the community. Survival was a collective effort, not an individual one. The longhouse embodied the philosophy of tribal unity. What if I told you that everything you've been taught about winter clothing has been known for centuries? The main secret to protecting yourself from the cold is not the thickness of your clothing, but the right number and combination of layers. Indigenous peoples perfected this principle, creating clothing systems that were warm, lightweight, breathable, and unrestrictive. The basis of this system was layering. Instead of one thick and heavy piece of clothing, they used several thinner layers. Air was trapped between each layer, which, as we already know, is the best natural insulator. The bottom layer, next to the body, was made of thin, soft suede, deer or antelope skin, tanned to a fabric-like consistency. This material was pleasant to the touch and absorbed moisture well, wicking it away from the body. This was critically important as wet skin freezes much faster than dry skin. The second layer consisted of basic clothing, shirts, leggings, and dresses. They were also sewn from well-tanned leather, but thicker. The loose fit of these clothes did not restrict movement and created additional space for an air layer. The outer clothing consisted of spacious capes and robes sewn from whole bison hides with the fur on the inside. The long, thick fur created a powerful insulating layer, and the smooth leather surface on the outside provided excellent protection from the wind. Such a robe was a versatile garment. During the day, it protected from the cold, and at night it turned into a warm blanket. Special attention was paid to protecting the feet, as they were most in contact with the cold ground and snow. High moccasins were sewn from several layers of durable leather. Insoles made of dry grass or fur were placed inside to provide additional insulation and absorb moisture. Winter moccasins were often made much larger than the foot. This allowed several layers of fabric or fur socks to be worn, and the extra space to be filled with additional insulation. The same cattail down or rabbit fur was often used as insulation. Mittens sewn from leather with fur on the inside were used to protect the hands. Unlike gloves, mittens keep the fingers together, warming each other. This simple solution allows for much more effective heat retention in the extremities. The head was protected by hats made of beaver, otter, or other animals with thick, dense fur. Often the hats had ear flaps that could be lowered during strong winds or frost. Sometimes a hood from a robe was thrown over the hat for additional protection. This whole complex system was dynamic and easily adapted to changing conditions. During physical activity, the top layer could be removed to avoid overheating and sweating. During rest or severe frost, on the contrary, it was possible to wrap up more tightly. But even the warmest clothing is useless if there is no energy to heat it. In the next chapter, you will learn what fuel made it possible to keep a fire going where there was not a single tree. In the vast expanses of the Great Plains, forests were rare and in many places non-existent. Finding firewood for daily heating and cooking was virtually impossible. This shortage of the main source of fuel forced nomadic tribes to find an ingenious and inexhaustible alternative resource. This resource was dried bison dung, known as bison chips. Huge herds of these animals, numbering in the millions, left behind countless amounts of this valuable material. For the inhabitants of the plains, it was real dry gold. Collecting dung was an important part of daily life, especially in the run-up to winter. This was mainly done by women who stored it in special baskets or bags. The collected material was brought to the camp and left to dry in the sun and wind. Completely dried bison dung is a dense fibrous mass consisting mainly of digested grass. It burns very slowly and evenly, giving off a large amount of heat but producing almost no smoke. This quality was especially valuable, as acrid smoke inside a teepee would be a serious problem. Smokeless burning was also an important factor in camouflage. A camp with dozens of such fires burning was virtually invisible from a distance. This was an advantage both for hunting and in case of military danger. The aroma of burning bison dung was distinctive, but not unpleasant. Eyewitnesses described it as a smell similar to dry grass or peat. For people who grew up on the prairie, this smell was an integral part of the comforts of home. The efficiency of this fuel was remarkable. A small pile of chips was enough to keep the fire burning for several hours. This allowed for economical use of supplies and saved time searching for and gathering fuel. The use of dung was part of the waste-free cycle of life on the plains. Bison provided people with almost everything: food, clothing, shelter, and even fuel. It was an ideal system in which humans were fully integrated into the ecosystem around them. Supplies of this fuel were made for the entire winter. Large piles of dried dung were stacked next to the teepee. Sometimes they were covered with skins to protect them from snow and moisture. This example shows how inventive indigenous peoples were in using available resources. They saw value where others would see nothing. The ability to turn animal waste into a major source of heat and energy was key to survival and prosperity on the Great Plains. Ready to learn the shocking truth about how ordinary snow was turned into an impenetrable insulating wall? No matter how perfect the design of a dwelling was, its thermal efficiency could be significantly improved with simple but ingenious external insulation techniques. The indigenous peoples of the North skillfully used the most accessible natural materials, earth and snow, to create an additional powerful protective barrier around the perimeter of their homes. What Europeans considered an enemy, the Indians turned into an ally. Snow was not a problem, but a solution to the problem of cold. One of the most common and effective methods of insulation was banking. In the fall, before the onset of severe frosts and snowfalls, the lower part of the walls of the dwelling was methodically covered with a thick layer of turf, loose earth, or heavy stones around the entire perimeter. This deliberately created a thick and dense layer of natural insulation, half a meter thick, which effectively protected against the piercing wind and cold coming from the frozen ground below. The earth was a free insulator available everywhere. All you had to do was bend your back and pile it up against the walls. Labor was the only currency. This earth embankment reliably closed all the cracks and gaps in the lower vulnerable part of the dwelling structure, through which cold air could actively penetrate inside along the perimeter. It also critically prevented deep freezing of the soil directly under the foundation of the dwelling, preserving the relative warmth of the earth. As a result of this insulation, the floor inside remained several degrees warmer than without the embankment. The difference was noticeable to bare feet. A warm floor meant a warm house. The cold came from below, and blocking it at the source was critically important. With the arrival of winter and the first heavy snowfall, this embankment system automatically became even more effective. The snow, which naturally accumulated and was blown by the wind onto the earthen embankment at the base, created an additional thick layer of excellent insulation on top of the ground. As we already know from physics, loose, fluffy snow is an excellent natural heat insulator due to the large amount of immobile air between the snowflake crystals. Up to 90% of the volume of snow is air, the best insulator. Snow worked like natural foam, created by winter itself to protect against winter. A paradox, but a fact. The inhabitants of the camp or village purposefully and methodically shoveled additional snow onto the walls of their dwellings, consciously creating a high and dense artificial snowdrift around the entire perimeter of the building. Such a man-made snow wall could reach a height of a meter or more, almost to the roof. It completely blocked the direct wind on the approaches and reduced the loss of precious heat through the lower part of the house to an absolute minimum due to insulation. The higher the snow wall, the warmer it was inside, a direct relationship that everyone understood from experience without thermometers or calculations. This method of snow embankment was especially vital for mobile dwellings, such as the tipis of nomads or the wigwams of sedentary tribes, where the lower edge of the leather covering did not physically fit perfectly tightly to the uneven ground without gaps. Snow embankments around the perimeter sealed this vulnerable area of heat loss tightly. As a result, cold air from outside could not penetrate inside through the gaps at the base, and warm air from inside could not escape outside in the same way. Snow was both a sealant and an insulator, a dual function of a single material that worked around the clock without maintenance. In regions with very deep snow cover, for example, in the subarctic taiga zone, semi-underground or completely underground winter dwellings were sometimes built for maximum protection. A significant depression was dug in the ground, 1 to 2 meters deep, over which a low wooden roof frame was erected for support. All of this was completely covered with a thick layer of loose earth and dense snow several meters thick, resulting in a very warm and well-protected shelter from the wind, almost invisible from the outside. Such a dwelling was practically a needle made of earth and snow, where the temperature inside remained around zero even when it was minus 30 outside. A 30-degree difference created by insulation several meters thick. Even the entrance to the dwelling was specially designed with future snow cover in mind. Often a long, tunnel-like corridor or vestibule several meters long was built in advance in front of the main entrance, using branches and stretched skins. In winter, this corridor was completely covered with snow up to the ceiling, and it naturally turned into a real snow tunnel with solid walls, which served as an excellent air vestibule, effectively cutting off the cold air from the living space. The vestibule was a trap for the cold. It got stuck there, unable to penetrate further inside to the people. Thus, snow, a hostile and deadly element that had to be endured, was wisely transformed into a useful building and insulating material. The ability to properly use its unique insulating properties was one of the key practical skills for survival in the Arctic. It allowed any modest dwelling to be turned into a real, impregnable winter fortress against the cold, where one could live comfortably for months. Knowledge turned an enemy into a friend. Snow was not a curse, but a blessing for those who knew how to use it. These simple but ingenious techniques convincingly prove that complex, inaccessible technologies and expensive imported materials are not always necessary for effective home insulation. Sometimes the best solutions are literally right under our feet, in the ground and snow around us. But how exactly did people organize their interior living space to preserve precious heat inside as much as possible? You will learn about these clever layout tricks in the next fascinating chapter. The efficiency of a dwelling depended not only on its appearance and insulation, but also on the competent organization of its interior space. Every element of the interior, from the location of the hearth to the design of the sleeping areas, was part of a well-thought-out system for conserving heat. It was the ergonomics of survival, perfected. As we have already mentioned, the hearth was rarely located in the geometric center of the dwelling. Its displacement towards the entrance, as in a tipi, or its location along the central axis, as in a longhouse, was related to the optimization of airflows. This allowed smoke to rise and fresh air for combustion to flow to the fire without creating drafts in the living area. Stones were often laid around the hearth. During the day, these stones were heated by the fire, and at night, when the flames died down, they slowly released the accumulated heat. This simple heat battery helped to smooth out temperature fluctuations and maintain a comfortable microclimate. The space inside the dwelling was clearly divided into zones. The area directly next to the walls was the coldest, so it was used for storing things and supplies. These items created an additional buffer between the living area and the cold outer wall. Sleeping places were always located on a slight elevation from the ground. These could be wooden platforms, as in a longhouse, or simply a thick layer of branches and grass covered with skins. Raising the sleeping place by just 20-30 centimeters allowed people to avoid contact with the coldest layer of air that spreads across the floor. In tipis, sleeping places were often arranged in the form of comfortable couches with backs made of willow rods. These backs not only provided comfort, but also served as an additional screen, protecting sleepers from possible drafts. All personal belongings were stored behind these backs along the wall. The inner lining, which we talked about in the chapter on tipis, also played an aesthetic role. It created a smooth and light surface that reflected the light from the fire, making the dwelling brighter and more comfortable. Often, this lining was painted with various patterns that had symbolic meaning. Even something as simple as the direction of the entrance was of great importance. Almost always, the entrance was oriented to the east or southeast. This not only protected against the prevailing cold west and north winds, but also allowed the first rays of the morning sun to enter the dwelling, bringing light and a little warmth. The doorway was always as small as possible to minimize heat loss. It was closed with a thick skin curtain, which was often weighted down with a stick or stones for a tighter fit. In some cultures, such as the Iroquois, the entrance was a complex vestibule, further increasing thermal efficiency. Thus, the interior layout of the dwelling was no less important than its exterior shell. Careful planning made it possible to create comfortable and warm areas for sleeping and resting. Every inch of space was used with maximum efficiency to achieve the main goal, preserving precious heat. At night, when the fire in the hearth died down and the temperature inside the dwelling dropped, the main protection against the cold was proper sleep arrangements. Bedding and sleeping methods were designed to maximize and preserve the heat of human bodies. It was a whole science of comfortable sleep in extreme conditions. The bed was based on a multi-layered pie of insulating materials. First, a thick layer of spruce branches or dry grass was laid on the floor or sleeping platform. This springy and fragrant layer created an air gap that cut off the cold coming from the ground. Thick, coarse skins, such as bear or bison, were laid on top of this base with the fur facing up. They served as a kind of mattress, providing softness and additional insulation. Their thick skin prevented the cold from penetrating from below. The next layer consisted of softer and lighter skins, deer, elk, or sheep. People slept directly on these. These skins were pleasant to the touch and retained heat well. The most valuable and warmest furs were used as blankets. These could be large robes made of bison skins, sewn together from beaver or rabbit skins. Such a fur blanket was very light and at the same time incredibly warm thanks to the thick undercoat that retained a lot of air. People often slept in their everyday clothes, removing only their outer robes, which they used as extra blankets. This allowed them to save time on changing clothes and be ready to get up quickly if necessary. Moccasins were usually taken off at night and dried by the fire. One of the most effective ways to keep warm was to sleep together. Members of the same family slept close to each other, warming each other with their body heat. This simple and natural solution significantly reduced heat loss for each individual. Some cultures even had special sleeping bags sewn from two large skins with the fur on the inside. Such a bag was much warmer than a regular blanket, as it surrounded the body on all sides. It was indispensable during travels or hunting trips. Before going to bed, the coals in the hearth were often covered with ashes. This allowed them to smolder all night, giving off a little heat and retaining the warmth until morning. In the morning, it was enough to fan the coals to quickly start a new fire. In this way, nighttime rest was carefully organized. A multi-layered bed, warm fur blankets, and sleeping together created a safe and warm cocoon. This allowed people to fully recover their strength for the next day, full of winter chores. In addition to the fire in the hearth, there were other, less obvious sources of heat that were actively used for heating. The main one was the human body itself, which functioned as an internal furnace. Proper nutrition and simple physical techniques kept this furnace in working order. The basis of the winter diet was food high in fat and protein. Fats are the most concentrated source of energy, which releases a large amount of heat when broken down in the body. Therefore, fatty meat, bone marrow, and nuts were an integral part of the winter menu. One of the most famous examples of such high-calorie food was pemmican. It is a mixture of dried and powdered bison meat mixed with melted fat and sometimes dried berries. Pemmican was light, compact, could be stored for years, and provided a huge amount of energy to fight the cold. Hot food and drinks also played an important role. Hot broth or herbal tea not only warmed you from the inside, but also helped maintain water balance. In winter, dehydration creeps up on you, but it is just as dangerous as in summer. In addition to internal heat, people also used external portable sources. One of the simplest and most effective was heated stones. Smooth, medium-sized river stones were placed in a fire, and when they became hot, they were taken out and used for various purposes. Hot stones wrapped in a piece of leather could be placed in bed before going to sleep. They slowly gave off heat for several hours, warming the sleeping area and turning it into a cozy nest. It was a safe and effective way to keep warm at night without an open fire. The same stones could be used to warm clothes before putting them on in the morning. Cold leather clothing, frozen in the frost, was very uncomfortable. Warming it with hot stones made the process of getting dressed much more pleasant. Small heated stones could be held in mittens during long stays in the cold. They worked like individual warmers, saving fingers from frostbite. This was especially important for hunters who had to sit motionless in ambush for hours. Sometimes hot stones were used to cook food without direct contact with fire. The heated stones were placed in a leather or wooden container with water, bringing it to a boil. This method allowed soups and broths to be cooked even in the absence of fireproof cookware. These simple but effective methods demonstrate a comprehensive approach to the problem of heating. The combination of a high-calorie diet, hot drinks, and the use of the heat capacity of stones made it possible to maintain a comfortable body temperature. It was a system in which every calorie and every joule of thermal energy was taken into account. Survival in harsh winter conditions was not only a matter of technology and materials, but also of a special psychological attitude. Indigenous peoples did not perceive winter as an enemy to be defeated. For them, it was a natural and integral part of the year, with its difficulties but also with its advantages. Winter was a time of rest and recuperation after the intense summer season of hunting and gathering. People spent long, dark evenings together in their warm homes. It was a time for socializing, storytelling, repairing equipment, and performing rituals. This perception transformed winter from a period of deprivation into an important part of the annual social and spiritual cycle. People did not fight winter, but lived in its rhythm. This psychological comfort was no less important than physical comfort. Mutual aid and collectivism were of great importance. The entire community worked as a single organism to survive the winter. If one family ran out of supplies, others shared their reserves with them. The communal way of life was also evident in everyday activities. Cooking together, caring for children, tanning hides. All this took place in close cooperation. A sense of solidarity and the awareness that you were not alone gave strength and confidence. Survival skills were passed down from generation to generation. From an early age, people learned to recognize the signs of approaching bad weather, find their way in a blizzard, dress appropriately, and use resources sparingly. This knowledge was of the utmost value, guaranteeing the survival of the entire people. They knew how to appreciate the simple joys that winter brought: the bright sun sparkling on the snow, the silence of the snow-covered forest, the patterns of frost on the trees. All this was part of the beauty of the surrounding world. The ability to see this beauty helped them cope with difficulties. Their attitude toward nature was based on deep respect. They took from it only what was necessary for life and always gave thanks for its gifts. This philosophy prevented them from depleting the resources on which their future depended. Energy conservation was elevated to an absolute. In winter, people tried to move as little as possible without necessity, conserving strength and calories. Any outdoor work was planned so that it could be done as quickly and efficiently as possible. Thus, survival in the cold was a holistic system that included not only material culture, but also social organization, psychology, and worldview. It was this comprehensive approach that allowed indigenous peoples not only to survive, but to live fully and thrive in the harshest conditions on our planet. Their experience is an invaluable lesson in harmony between humans and nature. We can see that the secret to the survival of Native Americans in the coldest winters was not some single miracle invention. It was a complex, multi-level system in which ingenious engineering solutions were combined with a deep understanding of the laws of nature and wise social organization. From the aerodynamics of the Tipi to the thermodynamics of layered clothing, from the use of dry gold, from the plains to the architecture of snowdrifts, each element of this system was refined over centuries and worked in complete harmony with the others. They proved that complex and energy-intensive technologies are not always necessary for a comfortable life. Sometimes all you need is observation, ingenuity, and the ability to use the resources that nature itself provides. Their legacy is not just a fascinating page in history, but a source of inspiration and wisdom that is more relevant than ever today, in an era of environmental challenges. Which of these ancient principles of survival and energy conservation do you think we could apply to our modern lives? Suggest topics for future videos that you would like to see on our channel in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on new research into the wisdom of ancient peoples.